Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second online lecture in week 10 here, talking about chapters 14 and 15 of Exercise Physiology, Kinesiology 406 for Concordia University. And that being said, as was mentioned in the previous video, since we are going online as of just over halfway through our course this semester, forced to do so with COVID-19 and concerns about it and spreading that particular viral illness. We are doing the best we can with everything we have. And in this case, I'm going the only place I can in my house to do this video at a time which I can do it with my wife, who has work all day long at home, but on the phone the entire day. And then I have a 4-year-old daughter that I'm taking care of. So now I've finally been able to get upstairs in a room that is not exactly ideal in terms of lighting or probably acoustics, let alone timing of doing it. But it's here, and we're going to do it. And here's the video. I'm going to do the best I can with it. And as many of you have already done, if you have questions, when you have questions, for the time being, email those and in the discussion board post. When you make your post, you can actually post questions in the discussion board too. So as you go to make your post, put questions in there. And then of course you'll go back in the same location and you'll add more to your post. So in your place of posting for the week, that's the place to put questions. Here's the thing. When I get to it, when I can, I will get to it either Friday or Saturday at the latest every week. I don't anticipate Sunday morning. I'll tell you, if some reason I haven't gotten anything by Saturday, I'll tell you it's going to happen on Sunday morning. I don't want to make it that for all of our sakes. That being said, also, if any of you answer some other student's questions and do it well, you will get bonus points on your discussion board, and I am willing to give you more discussion board post points than is available. So if you really do a fantastic bang up job, and most we can get is 20 out of 20 on a given discussion board, you have a 17 out of 20 your discussion board, and you went way out of your way to answer numerous questions by other people and do a phenomenal job of it, you could get 20, 21, 22 out of 20. I don't mind doing that for you. And I don't want you to think a couple of you expressed concerns with when I say grading your discussion board posts harder. Well, I'm going to grade them harder because it's the only thing you have, really. All there is you watching the videos, your discussion board posts, then doing an exam. I don't mean to scare you that somehow this is going to be something that's going to be incredibly hard. And all of a sudden, where I was giving you an 18, now I'm going to give you a 14. But I will certainly be looking at 5 or 10%-ish improvement, okay, from a standpoint of your efforts, because you don't have to be in class. You don't even have to look at the videos. You could just try to learn this stuff, and hopefully you get it without watching the video, but I know this can be hard to do. My videos will almost always be really close to 30 minutes or less. That's my goal. I don't want to make it an hour-long video, so it's less time for you watching a video or having a lecture, more time working. That's set. We'll do the best we can with this. Email me with questions you have, put it in a discussion board post, put it there as well, and then we'll figure this out as we go that works best for all of us, okay? We'll look to improve every week, not just you in terms of your performance, but me, my performance. Maybe better lighting and better locations and better timing, all those things too. That said, a few points to clarify with training for sport for chapter 14, as well as body composition and nutrition for sport, part of our chapter for our discussion board, right? Starting with right off the bat here, looking at overreaching versus overtraining. A couple of you had questions. To be clear on this, overreaching is a lighter version of overtraining. When you've been overworking yourself the last week or so, or it doesn't even really matter how long you've been overworking yourself, if you take a few days off or you taper down to a lower intensity, lower duration, more rest between sets, maybe a couple extra rest days between days within a week or so, maybe 2 weeks max, and you're back to normal again, that's overreaching. You were just doing a little too much. It's overtraining when it takes you many weeks, probably months, maybe even years to recover from what you're doing. That's the ideal, that's the primary separation between overreaching and overtraining. Symptoms are the same general concept. One is lighter and more short-term, acute, which is overreaching. One's more chronic, which is overtraining. Okay. You could actually call it acute overtraining and chronic overtraining. Probably you could do that as well. That being said, I'm going to just briefly back here when it talks about output needs to be reduced to 40-60% VO2 max. A couple of you asked questions about clarifying again what's low, moderate, and high intensity VO2 max, force output, RPE, all of that. We have said that in the past. I'm going to ask you to dig a little bit on that. I'm not going to give it to you exactly. We've talked about it in the past. I have said it in the class. If it's been a little bit different from one time versus another, it wouldn't be by much. So I expect you to be able to do that with fairly reasonable level of determination. Your book actually mentions that for VO2 max. for what's low, what's moderate, what's high. It's very basic, 0 to 40%, 40 to 70%, 70% and above, okay? 75%, generally speaking, everyone accepts as being high intensity. That said, remember force output, we said your maximal force output is what you do in a few seconds, and what you do for VO2 max, which is about 10, 12 minutes, is probably 60, 65% of that force output, or that VO2 of that force output. Consequently, go down from there, and you got to do some math for the force output from high to moderate to low intensity ranges, okay? And I have mentioned those ranges before as well. That being said, I want you to at least make the effort. I'm not worried about perfection in this regard because it's not exact. It never is. I expect you to be close, okay? That being said, certainly ask more questions as you will, but I want to see you take a shot at that before we start worrying about going over that information in greater detail again, which I will next week, depending on how you do in your discussion board posts. That being said, some points, not so much about the altitude, but training and adaptation in general, more from body composition standpoint. There's no real ideal body composition when we talk about body composition in terms of total fat mass to total body mass. In other words, body composition is usually measured as if you're 15% fat, right? That means 85% of you is not fat. That would include body water mass, which by the way varies from 45 to 65% depending upon male or female. Females vary more widely than males typically do, but it could be just under 2/3 of your body to just under half of your body is body water, right? The plasma, your blood plasma, is basically largely body water. Is water, excuse me. And of course, your plasma, as far as your blood goes, is 55% of your blood. So you're looking at about 45 to 50% of you in terms of what's circulating within you is water, right? Generally speaking, it could be more. That's where it can vary, 45 to 65%. That being said, when we talk about ideal body fat from a standpoint of you can always have more fat than muscle. You're just going to. You don't have more skeletal muscle than fat in your body. That would take someone well into the single digits for that to be the case, and they wouldn't be a large person. As we mentioned before, if someone is 230, 240 pounds and they're 5'9", 5'10", somewhere in there, and they're rock solid, and you can see them, they're striated, the veins are popping, you can see every muscle, every ripple, every aspect and definition of their arms and their chest and their abdominal muscles and their legs and all of that. They're still going to be, if they're that big, going to be double-digit body fat. People don't like to hear that, and it gets them all mad, and why would they care? We mentioned this briefly before. You look great. Why are you worried about the exact number of body fat? The fact of the matter is, you're incredibly striated, you look fantastic, you're big, you have tremendous hypertrophy. That was your goal. And no one judges a bodybuilding competition by body fat percentage. They judge it based upon mass and how that mass looks proportional to and symmetrically within the body, which is far more important than body fat as a percentage, generally speaking. So we're really not looking for an exactness for body fat for anything, although there's some ranges that are probably helpful, as we've seen from a standpoint of performance, more importantly with like endurance type athletes and some athletes where maximal speed, maximal power, or maximal endurance, any of those factors is of tantamount importance above other factors. Lower the body fat, the better. But when you have a sport that's all across the board, there's some jumping, there's some running, there's some endurance, there's some changing direction, body fat matters a whole lot less, because there's so many other factors in terms of neural response and coordination and ability to have proper skill development than specifically worrying about body fat. So when we talk about the exact right body fat for any sport, there's really no such thing. No one's ever been measured more than 4.2% body fat, out of the research that I have seen, accurately in a lab. Now, I remember 20 years ago, and 25 years ago, measuring my body fat with calipers, and I got consistently in the 4s. I weighed 165 to 170, 175 at my 6-foot frame, and now I'm looking at 220, 225, 230 at times, varying within there. I'm probably somewhere between 16 to 19% on a given day. 16% is probably a pipe dream for me, but 17, 18, 19% for me now at the age of 49 with my height and my weight. That being said, I was extremely lean and thin, so thin, and that was 4% calipers. To be accurate, probably more like a 6 or a 7%, probably in reality, actual body fat. It's just not, the less mass you have, you're going to have less body fat. but you cannot get rid of intramuscular body fat. So when you have more muscle mass, you always have some gain in fat. Of course, the stronger you get, or I should say, the more fit you get, generally speaking, you burn body fat that's not essential. Consequently, you will get leaner. But whenever you gain muscle, you will always gain some fat with that as well. So we got to be careful how we judge body fat. When we use different methods for testing body fat, that'll give us different indicators of what's really going on, but also some are more accurate than others. Okay, so we talk about ideal body fat versus too much. We'll bring that back in just a little bit here. Okay, DEXA, basically a dual X-ray, dual energy X-ray, excuse me, absorptiometry, okay, is the most accurate but highly expensive. Basically, X-rays measuring bone density with the spectral imaging that is pretty much known to be just about the most ideally accurate body fat, and even it can be 1-2% off of your actual body fat. Hydrostatic is you get into a pool or a tub essentially, or a bathtub even, and you pretty much get your body fully immersed. You're either in a big hot tub type setting where they can weigh everything in the water, they can measure water displacement based upon the Archimedes principle of the buoyancy of water, can give you an estimate of someone's body fat. It's still not perfectly accurate. If you can't properly breathe out, exhale fully and consistently and well and in a timely manner relative to them doing the test, and the person doing the test is properly measuring their adjusting their equipment and all of those things, you can still be off. So that said, hydrostatic's the gold standard, but it can easily be off 2-3% or more body fat wise. Okay, although it is the gold standard and is generally speaking referred to as being more accurate than these other methods here that are more common. BODPA is not so common, but it is done. It can be pretty much right in line with hydrostatic in a lab setting, but usually is a percent to off hydrostatic. Skin fold measurements. You actually take in someone's body fat with calipers, right? Typically referred to the Jackson-Pollock method, which is 3 sites. For the men, it's always right side. It's going to be between their shoulder and their nipple on their chest, okay? Diagonal fold there. And for the women, it's they basically tricep, the back of the arm, between the shoulder and the elbow, okay? Vertical fold. And then you have for the abdominal area, for the next measurement, you have basically vertical fold next to the belly button for the men, diagonal on the side, the right side for the women. So they're both abdominal there. And the men and women are exactly the same for the leg, which is mid-thigh. That's the Jackson-Pollock method. Some people say, well, certainly if you do skin fold measurements and you measure like 5 or 7 or 12 sites, that's more accurate. Well, it assumes that you're accurate with every single independent measurement, whereby if you're off by a millimeter or 2, which is not hard to do, with any given specific location, measuring skin fold thickness, you can be off by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6% plus in measuring someone's body fat either too low or too high. So more sites, actually statistically, has been proven to be more likely to be incorrect, inaccurate, unless someone is incredibly specifically accurate every single time. How will you know? Do the test several times. If you're exactly on the same millimeter number every single time, you're probably getting some fair consistency there, and you probably can get a more accurate measurement by doing more sites. Some people also say, well, you have to do skin folds at both upper body and lower body. Actually, that completely ignores the fact that the most important factor for all the tests that use calipers for measuring body fat are based upon algebra, right? And these equations they come up with to try to match up with the algorithm after you do these skin fold measurements is trying to help you be consistent with measuring someone as you would for hydrostatic weighing. So it's only going to be as accurate as hydrostatic, possibly a little bit off from that, no matter how accurate you are with skin folds. More importantly, well, let's talk about more importantly, I should say, in a second, biological impedance, which is basically you holding onto a machine with your hands and or feet. Electrical current goes through you based upon your water content of your body. It's supposed to give a fairly accurate measurement of body fat. Well, if your contact points aren't accurate, if you're off body water in a given day, which means if you ate recently, if you drank a lot recently, or didn't drink or didn't eat enough recently in the last couple 2-3 hours, if you worked out in the last 2 or 3 hours, a lot of things can throw off body water. Okay, sweating, heat differences, a lot of things. And some of those might be minor, but they can also throw off 1%, 2 or more. I don't know if you've ever done one of these tests on a lesser quality piece of equipment, like a 30, 40, 50, $100 piece of equipment that maybe is not fully calibrated properly or not consistent, whereby you hold on to the handles, maybe you got your hands and feet on there and you hold it and you put your your height and your weight and all the different numbers that variables that it wants you to input, your athletic level and all that sort of thing. And then you step away, or a fitness level, I should say, and you go back and do it again, and it's different. If that's the case, it's either one, having difficulty measuring your body water content, or the machine itself is not really calibrated well or not a high level piece of equipment. Technically, all these tests have shown consistency in a lab setting with being right in line with hydrostatic weighing. And hydrostatic's been right there with DEXA. In a very controlled lab setting, it's possible to do that. But in this order is probably what you're seeing for consistency as far as accuracy goes. Bioelectrical impedance can be variable, really variable, 7%, 3%, 7% or more off. Skin folds can be actually up to 9% or more too. Just so many variables there. But here's the big kicker that I was getting at. Whatever method you use for measuring someone's body fat, if you're really trying to see a change because you want to see if someone's getting, quote, more fit, or their body weight wise, we're seeing a positive change as far as lesser body fat, not necessarily losing weight, but the body fat's going up or something like that, which would probably not be the case if they're active. If they're going through some crash diet, you might see something like that, okay? But even then, you gotta remember something about skin fold tests. A caliper test assumes that 50% of the fat you measure here, the skin layer, it assumes there's 50% here and then 50% below. For someone who's like a bodybuilder, the reason why it's not accurate for anybody who's also tremendously overweight, you don't have a 50-50 skin layer and below. It's more like a 10-90 or 80-20 or some variance from that, which dramatically throws off your results. Calipers do not work well for someone who's a large person. Plain and simple. Large mass because of muscle or large mass because of fat. You're not going to get an accurate measurement. Also with older people, because their just skin's so thin, you're either going to break the skin or you're just not going to get a consistency for the actual fat that be the skin layer and below. You're looking at people that are probably more in the teen range, going up to about 40, 50 years old, probably at most. And after that, it's not going to be ideal. And if they're a massive person, I don't mean that good or bad, it is what it is, they're a bigger person, then they're going to be harder to measure them accurately with calipers, which case bioelectrical impedance or doing hydrostatic, if it's available, would be your most ideal ways. If those aren't available, by the way, good old tape measures to measure size changes are probably very, very vital and probably more important than any of these factors for the majority of the people who are looking to exercise to get fit from a standpoint of overall wellness and health. From an athletic standpoint, you might want to know more deeply about what's going on body fat wise, but honestly, a fitness person, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. There's too much placed upon that, and we go from weight and being such a less important thing. People often talk about how much you weigh is really not that important. True, by itself, true, but also body fat by itself is really not that important. And what happens is people get more obsessed on body fat versus weight. Don't obsess on either one. Actual tape measurements, probably the best way to go for some measuring someone's changes, larger or smaller, whatever the goal might be, okay? Fat mass versus muscle mass, oops. When we're talking about muscle for strength, some people talk about, well, if you build more muscle, then we've talked this before in some of our in our discussion on strength versus cardio, so to speak, which really should have been more aerobic versus anaerobic. That's kind of the point we were trying to make. But it was really, that's why it confuses strength versus cardio, what we're really even talking about. But people are typically seeking more strength type training, weight room, not going on doing long endurance type work, not outside running, whatnot, but actually weight room area, that kind of thing, doing work that's clearly geared toward actual maximal strength or something close to it, or building strength. Just because you have larger muscles does not necessarily mean you have some dramatically higher metabolic rate. That's not true. Again, you're only going to burn an extra several calories for every pound of muscle from a daily perspective, as opposed to some great benefit like we've often told you're getting 50 to 100 calories more for every pound of muscle you have. That'd be insane. So in other words, if you gain 10 pounds of muscle, you'd be burning 500 more calories. That doesn't make any sense. That's a monstrous number, and that's just not true. One thing we have to really remember, if we haven't already gotten this, is crucial. Your metabolic rate is based primarily around your activity level. That's simple. If you're engaging in high intensity exercise, that's clearly going to boost your metabolic rate significantly if you can recover from it, right? Otherwise, you're just wearing your body down, eventually going to lower your metabolism. Or long duration activity for lower and moderate intensities, also the case. The primary reason cardiovascularly trained athletes typically have pound for pound a far higher metabolic rate is because they're engaging in such a long duration of exercise on a regular basis. 1 hour, 2 hours, or beyond, like a triathlete, several hours a day of exercise, of really going, not like our football practices or volleyball practices, basketball practices, and things like that, whereby we're going pretty hard at times, but we're not actually going constantly without stopping. And someone engaging in endurance exercise where they never stop for several hours is clearly going to have a higher metabolic rate. That's not hard to figure out, right? The way to improve your metabolism is through activity. Whenever someone wants to talk about losing weight and improve the metabolism and find their ideal body weight, the kind of thing you have to be doing is making sure we're engaging in the right amount of exercise on top of the right diet, the right level of sleep, we've talked about this before, and the right level of stress. Remember our 4 primary factors that we've at least mentioned once, if not many times before: your exercise, your diet, your sleep, and your stress levels. We need to maximize or maximally benefit all 4 of those areas if we're going to find that right optimal weight, okay? As opposed to there being a perfect weight based upon standards which are fine to get ideas for, but that we just don't, most of us don't fit in those categories. And I've looked at those too for my body size, my frame, and the idea I'd have to be so skinny, I'd be actually lighter than I was when I was running all the time. I think I'd be in the hospital to actually meet the standards that are actually listed there for my body frame relative to body weight, okay? I've never been there. Even I was an endurance athlete, still wasn't there. So that's telling us something, right? That it's not true for everybody. Genetic differences, individual differences, right? However, too little fat. If someone gets too low body fat, when you get in the single digits for body fat, there's a high risk of lowering testosterone, which is all the more reason why it can't be that a bodybuilder has single digit body fat. It can't be. Okay, if you're really single digit body fat, you're going to have lower testosterone levels. You start getting the 5, 6, 7%. We don't want that. We really don't want to be any of those categories. That's why people say that in their top tier athlete, there's no way you're 5, 6, 7% body fat. You're much higher than that. And that's a good thing. 10, 11, 12% is a much healthier place to be from a standpoint of having to be able the ability to actually maximize testosterone, IGF growth factor, insulin-like growth factor, and growth hormone. The three of the big players that are really crucial for muscle mass, for muscle strength, for power output, all those kinds of things. You want to have higher fat levels, unless you're an endurance athlete, in which case you're not worried about testosterone levels, IGF growth factor, IGF insulin-like growth factor, or growth hormone. You're not worried about those things. They're not important. For a power athlete, they are, which means, guess what? More fat. Okay, we want to have more fat, not a crazy amount, ideal amount. So what's that ideal amount? Well, we're getting there. Power athletes versus endurance athletes. The power athletes need more, pretty much about ideally 11 to 13%. It's a pretty good number for the men, about 16 to 19% for the women. Those aren't perfect. Those are good numbers though. High teens women, low to mid teens for the men. Healthy places for power type athletes. Endurance athletes can be much lower. Again, that's a great risk for hormonal problems, chronic fatigue related issues can get that low. However, it's very typical for elite type or even high level endurance athletes, males and females. Women in particular, affecting their estrogen levels, affecting their menstrual cycle, of causing either amenorrhea or a dysmenorrhea. Amenorrhea having interruptions with the menstrual cycle, dysmenorrhea having a painful menstruation, neither one of which is good. Remembering, like we actually had in our last lecture, talking again about that number we said so many times. You're having difficulties with not feeling well, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. You've got to spend more time in that 40, 60% VO2 max, lighter activity level, maybe for several days, maybe just put one of those days between your higher intensity days. Got to figure out for you what makes the most sense or who we're training. Sometimes we need more of those days in a given week, month, and so on, sometimes less, okay? That said, those are the problems. Can dramatically lower testosterone levels and body fat's too low. Cortisol levels can often be very, very high as well, affecting our thyroxine, our metabolic rate, lowering that by decreasing our thyroxine secretion levels, affecting growth hormone and IGF, insulin-like growth factor, all those things, not good. Okay? That said, you can lose 10, 30 pounds in 24 hours. That's crazy, but that's body water and gastrointestinal bulk. And people have shown the ability to do it. None of it's healthy, ever. Okay? Bone mineral disorders. If you rapidly lose a lot of body weight, you can greatly affect bone mineral content, which will affect bone density longer term, certainly affect bone porosity shorter term, and basically create more probability of short-term injury and long-term injury, and maybe real significant health problems down the road with bone density. Not a good thing at all. The ideal way to build bone density, by the way, if we haven't already said this, and we'll say it again, is compressive force activities. Walking, jogging, running, jumping, whatever they can do, right? Doesn't mean everybody should go out and jump and sprint, but whatever they can do. If they can handle the stress and their compressive force activities, they'll build bone density in those areas. Overhead pressing, chest pressing, anything that's a pressing type motion, compressive forces against the ground reaction forces, not pulling actions, not rows, not pull downs, not arm curls. Those are not building bone density, okay? That being said, that's not calcium. Calcium is great. Got to get our calcium from in our diet, but is not the primary way to build bone density. We already talked about menstrual dysfunction a little bit. Chronic fatigue, clearly, if you engage in too much high intensity or too much duration of work, too little rest, too high of an intensity, too long a duration, or all the above, the trifecta of stupidity I often have called it, which we have all done, and I did to myself, chronic fatigue will ensue. And how long that lasts depends upon how much you've been doing, how soon you recognize it, how quickly you make adaptations to your training and adjust. Otherwise, you're going to be affecting your performance for quite some time, weeks, months, and maybe years. Okay. Eating disorders, bulimia, where someone eats and then they cause themselves to throw up, right? Can actually create long-term possible threat of throat cancer from all that acid and affecting the basically your throat to the point where actually some people have had to have surgery to be able to deal with the ramifications of what they've done, let alone all the acids coming up and affecting your entire pulmonary system from that. It's just a horrible thing, right? It's what's horrible for the person, of course, going through it. That's what we're saying. And they are doing it to control their weight, but still eat their food. Whereas someone who's anorexic, basically anorexia nervosa, is someone who typically avoids eating or doesn't eat very much. And it's not hard to see when someone's in the later stages of anorexia. A little bit harder to tell with bulimia unless you see the person doing it. Okay, although you can be both. Okay, you can be bulimic and anorexic. You can. Okay, that said, anorexic, you're talking about someone who's on the path of being so thin, oftentimes wearing extra clothes, and you can tell on some people, and you've probably seen people like this, that you can tell they're thin, and yet they're wearing so many clothes, and they're moving a lot. They still think they're overweight. This body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia is this idea that you don't look good, you're not pretty, you're not attractive, you're not handsome. Some men do it. Men are less likely to be susceptible to eating disorders, but men as well, not just women. Women are more predominantly likely to be unfortunately experiencing eating disorders. That said, if they're under 18, you got to talk to their parents. If they're 18 or over, you got to get them to a specialist, a psychologist and or a medical specialist, maybe both, okay, to help them with that problem. Having people fill out eating logs is a good thing with that. So you know kind of what they're doing, and they actually can tell you. Got to assume they're being honest though, which is always hard to do as well. That said, getting someone to see a dietitian is probably very, very much advised. Fasting. There's a lot that's been said in the last few weeks and months and even years about fasting being a great thing. Hey, don't eat for like 10, 12 hours every day. Matter of fact, don't eat anything of any real value for calorie content for most of your day. Have a coffee in the morning with have a Himalayan coffee or a bulletproof coffee. I don't care if you have coffee or Himalayan coffee or bulletproof coffee. If that's your meal, I'm going to argue that's ridiculous. That's a little bit of fat and caffeine and some water in a drink that may actually create diuretic type issues for you. So you end up urinating more than you take in. That's not true of everybody. Everybody has different responses to caffeine. But to caffeinate without getting proper nutrients is asking for long-term problems, often resulting in heart attacks down the road. And unfortunately, I've personally known people, let alone seen research on this, who have actually engaged in this. There's nothing wrong with the idea of doing what we call intermittent fasting from time to time, not every single day, where you go through a period where you're 8 to 12 hours between your next meal. Typically, we call that sleeping. No joke, okay? It sounds silly, but that's what it is. You eat dinner, and then really you go, but 12 hours later you eat. So if you went to bed at whatever time you go to bed, you finished eating at 8, don't eat again until 8 a.m. the next day. That's intermittent fasting. You make it 12 hours, pretty much 8 to 12 hours, but 12 hours, typically speaking, is intermittent fasting. The best time to do it is from the time you eat dinner to the time you go to breakfast, not from breakfast to dinner. That's all day long. That makes no sense. You always want to make sure you eat your biggest meal, preferably before the most stressful part of your day, really simply. When should your biggest meal be? When do you need the most caloric dense foods? Is it your workout? Is it some big meeting you have at work? Is it some presentation you have to make where you get really stressed out, you got to talk for 20 minutes, you don't like doing that stuff, that's your most stressful time of the day? Your biggest meal should come 2 or 3 hours before that. Your next biggest meal is what you eat 2 or 3 hours after that. Or maybe it could be the other way around, well, depending on what's going on. Your biggest meals are before and after your biggest stress point of the day. There's none of this like breakfast should be biggest, then lunch, then dinner is smaller. It actually makes no sense for many people. Some people it makes perfect sense. Depends very much on what happens in your day, right? If you need to be going in the morning, have your biggest meals in the morning. You got to be going in the evening more, have your biggest meals in the evening, okay? But there's no such thing as a perfect time to do that. Otherwise, your basic nutrient needs, carbs should be about 55 to 65% of your diet. I have yet to meet a human being that I've ever worked with, that when I got them on this 55 to 65% diet, okay, of carbohydrate, got them off their high protein or high fat, low carb, whatever they were doing, and more importantly, what the quality of that content of the carbohydrate was, which is predominantly, 80% or more complex, lower glycemic index carbohydrates. Glycemic index is 0 to 100, right? 100 means it burns as fast as straight glucose, and anything closer to 0, which there's no such thing as 0, be called no food. But the closer it gets to 0, the slower it basically your system breaks it down. So perfect world, you have something that's a lower glycemic index, so your body slowly breaks it down. It doesn't have a significant insulin increase, so consequently your body can slowly break it down properly, give you more longer duration of energy without creating insulin fluctuations that may affect your insulin sensitivity and affect your glucagon response. Remember, glucagon takes care of fat, whereas insulin tries to basically take up the glucose, right? We don't want to see that. So more complex. The only time you eat more simple carbohydrates are during longer duration exercise, 60 minutes or more, and post exercise, where it's highly intense to moderately highly intense. Within really 30 to 90 minutes post exercise, you want to have a 4 to 1 or 3.5 to 1 ratio of carb to protein. Carb more, protein less. Okay, that's for recovery. The tissue recovery is the protein. The energy, the glycogen restoration and proper circulation and proper hydration, all those things, is the carbohydrate. Okay, not to mention the water you're supposed to take in as well. That said, fat should be 20-35% of your diet. People who have hormonal problems, typically speaking, it could have any of these things be off, but the biggest thing is they don't get the proper fats. The proper unsaturated fats, which also contain the polyunsaturated fats. And that said, the olive oils, all the other different oils, fish oil, right? You can go to great detail talking about which ones, but the monounsaturated fats also have polyunsaturated fats in them. Some are better than others. Your fish is your best source. Salmon, one of the best. Sardines, black cod, some of the best you can possibly get. Fish. Okay. Next up would be your seeds and your nuts. Seeds and nuts, you'd have to eat a ridiculous amount to match up with what you get from fish. So if you don't eat fish in your diet, and you want to make sure you get the proper fats, you probably should be having possibly considering, I should say, not having one, but considering having basically your polyunsaturated fatty acids, your omega-3s, and in particular in a supplement form. Okay, 6s and 12s, 6s, 9s, and 12s, we tend to get more easily in our diet. 3s, not so much. That said, less than 10% of the saturated fats, and even less so the trans fats. Proteins, 10-25% of your diet, because we need that for not just we need the fat for your hormone function and the sex hormone production. Okay, carbohydrate for energy and brain function and metabolism of the other nutrients. That's what carb is important for. You don't have that, that's why people get tired. You get tired all the time. When I first go, you get enough sleep, exercise, then it's carb right after that. Okay, protein, tissue building, tissue repair, cellular repair, anything to do with cells, anywhere in the body. Protein, big player, huge player, right? That's 10-25% of your diet. I've never known anybody that needed to get more than 25% for long term. There's different reasons, either medically or from a sport perspective or bodybuilding perspective. You might see something change with that for a brief time, but more than 25% long term, there's nothing to support that there should ever be that high. Matter of fact, your book even says no more than 15%. Okay, 4 calories a gram for carb, 9 calories a gram for fat, 4 calories a gram for protein. Okay. We're going to talk more about vitamins and when you eat carbs and eating your weight in protein, all that kind of stuff a little more next week. But really, I want to do a couple of points here. Vitamins are not just expensive urine. They're the cofactors with your food. The B's and the C's are water soluble, so if you get too much, you're going to pee it out, but you got to get them. So I highly recommend, more than anything other supplement someone takes, a vitamin mineral supplement. Never known a human being, literally, that didn't need one. You read stuff out there all the time, oh, we don't need that, we get enough from food. Good luck. You have to eat all organic, you have to eat a ridiculous amount of vegetables, in particular, let alone fruits and proper meats and proper carbohydrates. Not necessarily meats, but meat is one option for the proteins, right? But it'd be very difficult to get your vitamins if you don't take a supplement. Difficult to take too much for the B's and C's, it really is. Okay, carbs in the morning, not late at night, that's silly. That's just silly. Depends on what you're doing. We already mentioned this. What's happening in the next 1 to 5 hours? High stress, high carb. Okay, not high stress, low carb. Okay, or at least lower carbohydrate. Carbs should be highest 1 to 2 hours before the highest energy need or stress, and of course after. Eat your weight in protein. Heard that one before? No, it should be between 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of your body weight, and no research supports anything else other than that. If you want to individually choose to do something different with that, that is you, it's up to you. But I would never recommend, you should never recommend anybody you're working with to do more than this, because that's just not proven. You're going anecdotal here, and you're taking a risk for their sake and for yours by being the one recommending it, okay? That said, this is well proven. You do not want to have more than 20-25 grams of protein per sitting. Otherwise, your body will basically just excrete it, okay, or can cause gastrointestinal stress. It's really not something you want to be doing, or store as fat because your body can't utilize it. So basically, 20-25 grams per sitting, okay? Excuse me. You ever heard someone say eat 5 to 7 times per day? That depends on how many calories you need. Depends on what you need to take in. Depends on what's going on during your day. The average person getting by with 3 meals a day is just fine. The average fitness person, probably just fine. But all depending on the person, they may need more snacks in there, not necessarily 7 meals, but maybe 3 meals and a couple snacks. That's probably more likely for most people. That said, we should eat more carb than fat. We did talk about this, generally speaking. If you need high energy at all, you need to be eating more carbohydrate. If you're not high energy, you probably need more carbohydrate, more complex, low glycemic index. And I've known anyone who had issues with oats, beans, well, gas, but other than that, like allergic responses, possible, but allergic to oats, highly unlikely. And the whole gluten controversy, it's been proven that basically 1 in 5 people has basically a sensitivity, okay? But only 1 in 20 actually has an allergy. So consequently, for 14 to 19 out of 20 people, or if you want to say even more broadly, 75 to 95% of people, there's no issue with gluten whatsoever. You can eat gluten, it's not going to cause problems for you, despite the media and the press on that. We should always be seeking to be eating as clean as we can, not to stress ourselves out. I think I've said this before, there's a lot of research to prove that if you try to stress out so much about how you can eat, what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat, how much you're going to eat on a regular basis, you can actually create so much stress, you can secrete high levels of cortisol on a regular basis such that you will gain more weight without ever having eaten the food in the first place. And actually, this is true. You could actually have less of a weight issue by having the hamburger, the cheeseburger with fries and a shake, that's the only thing you're at a fast food place and I can't eat anything here, or a chicken sandwich, whatever you want to have. But rather than just freaking out about it, eating food. Research supports that it's a better choice than to skip the meal and stress out about it. Okay, something to think about. And should you perform cardio while fasted? That's just ridiculous. The reason we perform cardio in the morning without any foods because you get up at 5 and you're going to run at 5:30 or something like it. What can you eat and goes through in 30 minutes other than a shake? You can do a shake, by the way, but it's also going to be likely to increase your glucose levels and increase your insulin response, which means your actual output level of your performance while you're training is going to go down, which is not the goal. So really we should be eating is 1 or 2 hours before you wake up, before you exercise, excuse me. Okay, that's the ideal time to eat. I don't have time to do that. No problem, performance will wane because you're doing it fasted. It's just that simple, okay? But no, fasted cardio is not the way to go. 1 or 2 hours, 4, maybe 3 hours, depending on what you eat, okay? That said, we will otherwise convene next week, talking about chapter 16, more detail on nutrition and other content factors with training. Email me if you have questions. Do a solid discussion board post for discussion week 10 this week, responding to at least 2 other people, preferably more, expecting you to do more than you've done the past few weeks, but email me if you have questions. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you again soon.